Okay, cool. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming down and talking with us today.
Good to be here, Mike.
Dude, awesome. Okay, so we are going to try to explore something that's going to be a little bit difficult to unpack because what was the line we were talking about kind of in the prep for this is the line in the manifesto. It says we're learning how to build software better by doing it and helping others do it, something like that. Is that a close enough paraphrase?
That is close enough.
It's a close enough paraphrase, right? So what we were joking about was the idea that Leading Agile is learning how to do Agile transformation better by doing it and helping other folks do it. And so that's kind of the spirit of what we're unpacking here a little bit. So we're going to introduce this new concept. I think what we're talking about, we're calling it organizations to summits. So let's start there. Well, I want you to talk to me a little bit about what we're doing with organizations to summits, and then I'm going to wind us back and I'm going to start talking about some of the underpinnings of it. So give me an idea of, for the listeners, what you're doing in some of the large accounts we're working in.
Yeah, so we have some, it's kind of an interesting thing. You know, I've been here for 5 years. Mm-hmm. When I joined 5 years ago, our mix was we had some bigs and we had some smalls, and in terms of our account mix, and over the last 5 years, it's really more biased itself to very large organizations.
Some really big organizational transformations.
Really big companies.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of people under transformation, moving to team, to delivery and product teams. So what in that journey, we've learned a lot. There was a comment like you made once on a phone call that I locked into, which is if your capabilities and your systems aren't aligned to your products, your customers and your markets, right? Your practices don't matter.
So you got to be careful around here when you just drop something, because you never know who's going to quote you and then keep quoting you and quoting it. Yeah. So we said something like, if your organization or if your structures and your systems aren't organized around your customers in the market, you're going to fail. Or you just augmented it to your processes don't matter. Right. So the process of Agile doesn't matter if your organization isn't aligned to your customers and markets.
And so what we see in these very, very large customers is that, it's small customers as well, is that generally they aren't aligned. Their systems, their capabilities, their value streams are not aligned to their markets and their customers. But taking them on that journey when they're dozen teams versus hundreds of teams is a very different task. It's a very different problem. And so we're learning a lot in this journey about how to take very large organizations and actually get them to the levels of business agility in that definition, aligning their capabilities and their systems to their markets and customers and what that requires.
Okay. One of the first insights, I'm going to go back in history a little bit. So I have one kind of mega client in mind, and we were going through, and just so everybody knows, anybody who's maybe not intimately familiar with the Leading Agile model, is that like everything kind of starts with teams, backlogs, and working tested software. And I know that sounds really small when you're talking about large scale transformation, but it's really like it's the smallest instantiation of this aligning your systems and structures to your customers and markets. Right? The whole idea behind a Scrum team is that you have this group of like 6 to 8 people that owns the technology, that owns a singular business problem. They have this idea of a product owner that is feeding requirements, and you can produce a working tested increment of software at the end of the day. And what we found is that a lot of the organizations we were going into, these really, really large organizations, the idea of a product was either like super gigantic, or it was like so crazy small that like you really couldn't do anything with it. So what we started to do, maybe you can talk to this a little bit, is that rather than to try to come in and to untangle the product hierarchy or to untangle the value streams on day one, because the organization just couldn't really fundamentally see it, we started organizing around business capabilities. Right? That became the language that we would use. We would organize around the business architecture. And I remember one of the first aha moments that I had when we were working on this account together was the idea that when you organize around business capabilities, there's inherently dependencies between them that because all of these different business capabilities have to be orchestrated in order to be able to deliver something of integrated value. And there was this moment where you were talking about, once you organize around the business architecture and you form those kinds of teams, what you do is you expose the cost of the orchestration layers, and you make the orchestration layers very explicit and very clear to where you can see how much the orchestration is costing you. And so that gives you the opportunity to at some point be able to take the business capabilities and to kind of go like, okay, where can we get the most cost savings? Let's reorganize around value streams. So what you're hunting, I'm not sure where you're going to go with this, but what we're hunting was there's certain things that you can do now in an early stage transformation to get it moving. But then later on, there's going to be some things that we might consider down the road once the organization has evolved. Talk to me about a little bit about that process of discovery you guys were going through there.
So early on, actually, it was early on in my Leading Agile,
Mm-hmm.
with the customer you're referencing. It was in my Leading Agile tenure. It was pretty early. I was still
Mm-hmm.
learning a lot about what we do, what we think, how we approach, the market and transformation. I actually had the inclination due to my prior, experience.
Largely XP.
Largely XP, right?
Okay.
So why can't we align to the value streams day one?
Yeah,
and
why?
so
Yeah.
I pushed on that with
Mm-hmm.
this client. And
Mm-hmm.
what I realized, there's a really big dog attached to that tail.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did we have not yet the agency, the transformation, let alone Leading Agile, the transformation itself did not have the agency to go to the business and say, we're going to reorganize you,
Mm-hmm.
which is effectively what that meant. So the business wasn't convinced yet. A lot of people in IT weren't convinced yet. And it really was a bridge too far with dependencies and funding, and like the amount of the organization that would have had to have been changed just to make that change was profound. And it was too much, right? There would have been too much load on the organization, not enough trust in the organization, and it just would have failed.
Mm-hmm.
So the customer, we worked through that together, and we went and we decided, let's take the organization we have. And as I learned more about Leading Agile and how we worked in base camps and expeditions, and how to do that work, how about we just take the organization that's largely ad hoc today, not super trustworthy, and we just get it to actually be able to say what it's going to be able to do and do it.
So be predictable.
So get to predictability.
Yeah.
And the focus was, let's get to a rational system of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
That we can trust, we can count on. We put something in, we know we get out.
Mm-hmm. Trustworthy system that you can delegate into.
Yeah, that's really what it was. So that became the focus,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns out that was also an immense undertaking.
Yeah, huge, multiple years just to get it to the point of stability.
Thousands of people,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also doable. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that everybody could sign up to.
Mm-hmm.
So still a very large wave of change.
Mm-hmm.
But also very successful at the end of the day, using our approach. So it was enough, right? But it wasn't too much.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna take a step back and for everybody's benefit, talk a little bit about the expeditions to base camp model. The original hypothesis behind this is that when you're looking at large scale organizational change, there was this notional idea, I believe, and I think it's still in our community a lot, is that either we're going to train people on process, and then like the organizational structures and the dependency management, all that stuff is going to self-organize away, right? Mm-hmm. So there's like one class of kind of approach to Agile transformation that goes that way. Train people on Agile, train people on mindset and culture, and they'll remove the impediments, and the organizational structure will emerge. And then one of the things we see a lot of times when we follow in behind some other consultancies is that they'll actually do these like lighthouse type projects where like they pull a whole bunch off to the side and they get like a pocket of agility, but they haven't really dealt with the legacy organization at all. And so one of the things with expeditions to base camps we were trying to do was trying to say, okay, what is the roadmap for being able to take an organization from point A to point B and to build trust along the way? Because so often when we go into these large companies, there's no organizational trust. So the one thing that we could consistently anchor on in these large organizations was organizing around the business architecture. So what we would do is we basically organize teams around the business architecture, deeply understand the dependencies between those teams, model the flow of value in like program and portfolio layers and kind of the multi-tier architecture thing, and get everything from strategy to portfolio management to program, product management, all the way down to the execution level, incredibly explicit. and just working in a very, very tight way. Now, and so kind of the way the story would go is that you would get the system predictable. An expression you taught me is like we know we don't want the dependencies and we know we don't want it organized that way, but like everything above it is like a compensating control. So while in the presence of dependencies, while going through the initial stage of the transformation, we're putting some compensating controls in to be able to orchestrate the flow of value across all the different teams. Once we've stabilized the system and we've got it predictable, then we start to think about how to reduce batch size. Right? Get some of the release management, some of the technology constraints out of the way. Then we start to figure out how to break dependencies. Then we start to figure out how to fund encapsulated teams. And then we start to give the teams a little bit more room to inspect and adapt and market and listen to customers and things like that. That was the overarching arc. And it was actually a fairly powerful story, right? Because what it kind of did is and especially in some of these large enterprises, gave us some permission, some agency to be able to come in and to start making changes and to start making improvements that could show value really, really quick. So that's what you guys really did at scale, 12,000, 13,000 people, really going through. Talk a little bit about that early stages of that journey.
Yeah. So what the base camp expedition, framework approach system did for me, I've been doing transformation.
Is it a framework approach or a system? I mean, you got to pick one.
It's all three.
Yeah.
So I've been doing transformations for 19 years. And you and I go back to a company called Pillar.
Yep.
And I remember back in the day with Pillar, very much XP based, extreme programming based, software, artisanship, technical practices, clean coder type of company. Everything was kind of, to the metal. If you're not test driving and doing continuous integration and automated delivery pipelines and everything else, you weren't kind of agile. Right? That was our definition of it.
Yeah. And
so phone's ringing. Perfect.
Ironically, right?
Ironically, after we said don't do that. So we hired a change management consultant, ostensibly because we had large customers and we could do 2 or 3 teams at a time. We weren't that big. But we had customers that were large scale. And so I would work with her and I would say, okay, what are we going to do to get an entire large insurance company or, route-oriented services company to, flipped over and transformed onto this agile stuff. And ostensibly, she kept coming back to me and talked about coaching the executives. We need to coach the executives. I'm like, okay, got it, right? We need to coach the executives, but what are we going to do?
We're going to coach them on.
What are we going to go do?
Yeah.
And there was a cycle that we were both stuck in because neither of us could come up with that answer. Like, how do we take a large organization? Yeah, great, 3-4 teams can get those, really, kicking butt. But how do we take a large organization and flip them over to Agile? And so when I kind of ran into what you all were doing, it solved a few different problems for me that I'd struggled with at Pillar. One was, how do I just not scale Agile, but scale transformation? Like, how do I have something that I can take and actually do N of, 10 or 20 of to move sets of teams to where they needed to go? So it was, something I frankly wish I had 10 years prior. It also solved the problem that you've talked about, which is, what do you wrap teams around? So at scale, what does a team own, right? And when teams have to deliver together, a lot of the things I did in my early Pillar days were very much, could fit in one team. Automate something that was a spreadsheet or, do some web app or something.
Yeah.
But as Pillar grew and as our customers grew towards the end of that, what I realized was the problems were growing. And even one set of teams couldn't get those problems done. Couldn't deliver those things to the customer. We didn't really have an approach for that. We didn't have really a way to go. So having a way to understand how teams need to be organized and orchestrated to deliver big problems at scale was also something that I thought was very helpful. So and then the third thing I would say was just the one size doesn't fit all message was super helpful for me.
Right. That really derives from the quadrants where you have like predictive conversion, adaptive emergent, right? That kind of a thing.
So I would have customers at Pillar who were ERP programs. And here I am saying, if you're not test driving custom written code,
Mm-hmm.
right, and you don't have continuous integration and end-to-end and travel light and all those things
Right.
that XP espouses, it's kind of not for you.
Yeah.
Right. That was kind of my belief system back then. I didn't have a solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked the fact that there was a kind of a delineation of how much business agility do we really need,
Mm-hmm.
based on what the business needs and the market, the value propositions that business is servicing. So maybe there's a place, for teams to work that aren't doing custom app dev in an agile approach. So it solved all those problems for me. And as we took it into, as I started to take it into the customers that I was working with, in my early days of Leading Agile, just found it to be super powerful to be able to have those conversations I could never have before. I actually had something to go coach the executives with, right, and to get them aligned.
So give them a way of doing it, a way of leading this transformation.
Yeah. So rather than having a bunch of spinning compasses, I could get them aligned around the three things, and system first transformation versus practice or culture first. I could get them aligned around how do we think about the level of business agility and how do we form these teams and what do we form. I had all of that capability to go talk to executives, get them all pointing in the same direction.
Yeah.
And actually then have a scaled approach to come in.
Because I think a lot of the leadership training has been how do you empower their teams and get out of the way. But the reality is that the executives that we're working with actually have to create the conditions so that the teams can be successful. And we had to give them guidance on what conditions to go create.
Yeah. Something I learned, one of the conversations I learned to have with executives over time is that the results of your transformation aren't going to be determined by how well we teach somebody to do Scrum.
Yeah, for sure.
They're going to be determined by what you as a leadership team are willing and able to help your organization become. And you have to lean in and own your transformation. You have to be an active participant, can't delegate it. It's not a Leading Agile transformation. It's your transformation and the importance of leadership. But you have to have leadership aligned, and then they have to have something to do.
Yeah.
You have to come to them with very concrete asks. And so, and it has to be, impact, and there has to be options and recommendations and all of that. So as we were applying this, and it was just super powerful to me. I mean, it got me at levels of scale that I hadn't really, achieved before in terms of moving, organizations to agility. What I did start to notice was in that Basecamp progression, there was a definite sort of dissonance that started to happen when we had organizational focus on all of the Basecamps at once. So executives, they aligned to it. They understood it.
Yeah, because in theory, we could be taking some groups to Basecamp 1 and 2, and some are working on 3 and 4, and some are moving to 5. Is that what you're referring
and
to?
So what we were finding, though, was that moving further in that journey was stretching and straining the organization in ways that it wasn't ready to handle yet. So we were starting to push into things that it couldn't do, that the organization couldn't actually take on.
Like, give me for example.
Well, so we had an early go where we were trying to change, so we were taking a set of teams that were targeted towards higher base camps, and we wanted to move them into more of a value aligned structure, but the business wasn't convinced. They were like, you're not going to change how we're set up.
Yeah.
You're actually talking about changing our business.
I imagine like funding models and how we do budgeting and
funding models,
planning and
architectural
like
and regulatory stuff. So architectural processes, we just didn't have that level of trust in the system yet. And so it was to take on all of that was overwhelming for the organization. So leaders had to think through space and time out to the end. And it was just overwhelming. But I remember sitting with a CIO and saying, okay, here's all, just to test and see how much change he wanted to take on. I said, here's the things you're going to have to go change. And what he said to me was, Chris, tell me what I have to do in the next 12 months to not die.
Yeah, sure.
And so like that gave me his time horizon that he wanted to work in.
Well, a lens that I'm actually going to I'm going to take a couple steps back because I think I see where you're heading on this. But one of the things that I thought you actually referenced it, it was a little bit of a throwaway comment, but you actually referenced that. I think it's pretty important. The difference between doing Agile at scale and doing transformation at scale. I thought that was a fascinating distinction. And we've actually codified that internally. We talk about system of delivery, which is basically a scaled Agile framework and all the patterns associated with that. But then this idea of a system of transformation, about how do you systematically move people through getting from, base camp 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, from just generally from point A to point B. One of the things that I've talked about in my, all the various flavors of the Agile transformation talks I've given over the last 10 years is this idea that transformation isn't about teaching people process. It's really fundamentally about getting the ecosystem in place so the process will actually work. And what that typically means is that you need team-based delivery models. You need to have lean, Kanban-based flow, governance frameworks. You have to have agile metrics. But the interesting part of it is that you really have to start figuring out how to break dependencies in the organization to be able to get to kind of true business agility, right? So the idea is that we're going to form teams, we're going to build backlogs, we're going to do structure, governance, and metrics, we're going to break dependencies over time. So where I think you're kind of going with this a little bit is that in an early stage transformation or even mid stage transformation, like where you guys were in with this customer, is that the bigger things in the organization, like governance, compliance, budgeting, accounting, enterprise architecture, I think you mentioned, those things can't change overnight, because as we're going through and we're making these changes at the execution level, the organization's not at a sufficient critical mass to be able to kind of bifurcate those processes and create multiple instances of it. So what I think this is how you were describing it to me. It's like what the organization is doing is it's allowing certain aspects of it to become more agile, but it's allowing those to operate in more of an exception mode. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you, how I said that?
It does.
Okay.
So there are things that we have to do, with all of our customers, to get back to the three things, right? Teams, so stable teams, prioritize backlogs, working tested product. And most of our customers, all of our customers, when we find them, you could characterize them as 100-gallon bucket with 1,000 gallons of work to do, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
They're all universally overwhelmed. And so we have to do a little bit of ruthless prioritization when we start. We have to be able to get them to where they can actually work at a sustainable pace. Because if we try to introduce practice or try to do an expedition, but where they're still expected to do 1,000 gallons of work with 100 gallons of capacity, not much is going to change. So there's things that we need to do up front to just enable us to get going.
Yeah.
Right. That we can even get started. If we can't stabilize teams, we've had other customers who don't see the line, they don't have line of sight to how they'd even stabilize teams. They want to have 7 people on 7 teams or 8 teams, and they want to have everybody allocated to the last half hour.
Yeah.
So there are sets of conditions that have to be in place, but the change of those conditions isn't necessarily, the system isn't trustworthy yet to where you could make that a pervasive change.
Right.
So as we're doing a slice of the organization in an expedition, we can install the conditions, the new organizational ecosystem within that, but it would be risky in many cases to do that across the board when we don't have those other areas actually actively in coached expeditions.
Right.
So it's not safe yet to remove those controls. So we have to do it slice by slice. It's one of the reasons I really like, the way that we work in those vertical slices. There are other conditions where it's a little bit like a soft cutover versus a hard cutover. Like there are things when we change a funding model, as an example, especially in a publicly held company, you can't have multiple sets of books. So if we were going to start to change funding models too early, and that were to affect how that organization was reporting to the street and having, to explain things to its auditors and have people sign off, we would be in effect doing the whole organization, changing the whole funding model before the whole organization was organized that way and was able to operate that way and was able to account for, the things it needs to account for that way. So certain things have to be done when you're at critical mass. So they have to be done once you've achieved a certain base camp versus other things, have to be done kind of as an enabler, but not necessarily pervasively.
Yeah.
And so it's when do we take the thing that we're creating exceptions for and make it the way we work now? Because enough of the organization has progressed to a level where it's trustworthy.
Yeah.
And it can operate in that frame and not induce risk or whatever the exposure would be to the organization.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because what's kind of emerged out of this, so a little bit of backstory, is got the leadership team together in Snowbird, Utah. It was really kind of cool to get to go out into the conference room where the manifesto was signed and to start beating our heads together a little bit and trying to solve some of this. And so this is as the story starts to emerge is in my head, like literally my head, we had this really clear linear story. And like most things, it's never quite as linear as you talk about it, but it was a way of telling the story. We would talk about Basecamp 1, get predictable, Basecamp 2, reduce batch size, Basecamp 3, start to break dependencies, start to do team or organizational based funding, and then, change kind of strategy to this invest to learn thing. Right? So we talked about that. And so Chris and I are literally going toe to toe. And he goes, there's something else besides base camps. And I would argue, I'm like, nope, it's there. It's all in there. And so where Chris and I kind of landed is that in a lot of, let's say smaller transformations, maybe even 100, couple hundred people, something like that, that you could actually address a lot of the things that you're talking about while you were bringing expeditions to base camps, because you could run enough concurrent base camps expeditions that were all moving somewhat simultaneously. So as you move the expeditions into the base camps, you would deal with the governance issues and the compliance issues and all the different things that you needed to do. But what's fascinating is when you get up into this kind of like this ultra large scale, and by that meaning thousands, tens of thousands people, there were certain things that you couldn't change. So, right away. So what the interesting aha moment and what it revealed is that there's the expedition to base camp. And then what we started to call it, and this is where it's going to get hard to hand wave. You almost wish you had like a whiteboard in this kind of discussion, but we talked about organizations to summits. Right? And so that's the new language that we're starting to play with a little bit. And the general idea is that you start to move expeditions to base camps. And then once you get a sufficient amount of the organization operating in this new way, that becomes the new norm. It becomes the rule. So while we were making exceptions to accommodate the early expeditions, now what we need to do is we need to change the rules to accommodate this new way of working. Does that make sense?
It does.
Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing there.
So if you think about what you just said in terms of there's the system of delivery, which we're building slice by slice. We're taking expeditions to base camps, and depending on what level of business agility you need, the base camp that you're destined to reach. But then there's the organizational design that cares for or kills one or the other.
Let's anchor on that. Right? I want to come back to that. Cares for or kills.
Right.
That's pretty profound.
So there's an ecosystem around that system of delivery that was designed ostensibly because the thing that we're replacing wasn't trustworthy. So it's funny. Doc Norton does a talk about how organizations are designed to protect themselves from their employees. And so
I think there's some truth to
There's some truth to that. But what I think we're seeing more is they're designed to protect themselves against their system of delivery.
Okay.
So their system of delivery is not trustworthy. Therefore, they need to have a lot of control structures in place because people don't have clarity about what the right thing to do is or don't have the ability to do the right thing.
I want to drive that point home. So if the system isn't trustworthy, basically meaning you can't delegate a known amount into it and get a predictable outcome, then that's what's driving kind of a lot of the compliance and regulation and command and control things is when you don't have a trustworthy system of delivery.
Right. So people will try to get their jobs done. And in many cases, the organizations we start with that hire us, those people are heroes. They have to fight the organizational design and figure out how to get their job done. And if they do it well, they're lauded as heroes, and if they don't, they're probably something else happens. But so I don't think organizations are designed to protect themselves from their employees. I think they're designed their employees are trying to do the right things despite the organizational design. So they put controls in place to control their employees ostensibly within that.
Okay.
So it's not that people have, are incompetent or evil or anything like that. It's that the system they exist in drives them into decisions and behavior that needs to now then be controlled.
Sure.
And so you get into this really tight, self-reinforcing cycle. So as we're moving through though, and we're starting to create trustworthiness in the system can predict how much work it's going to get done. It can tell you when it's going to get it. It can actually change if the situation changes. What happens is that you have now a new system of delivery, but you still have the old ecosystem.
Yeah. And this is where I think a lot of people get hung up because they'll feel like they're doing Agile right, but they can't get all those other people out of the way. And it's like you end up with a dual mode system, like legacy project management wrapped around Scrum teams or something like that in the small.
Yeah. And so everybody's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You have two systems that weren't designed for each other. And you're moving into this, the further you go, the more trustworthy you become. But yet the ecosystem around it wants to still control you as if you're a threat. And so what we find is that, back to the earlier conversation, there are elements of that system that have to remain in place. But we need within the slices we're working, those elements would actually be detrimental, if not fatal, to what we're trying to do.
So they operate in the exception mode.
So we operate in exceptions. So we have to be very careful about, when we remove those controls, because if we're working with 1,000 people at one time and there's 10,000 people in the organization, then 9,000 people's worth of control is lost, right?
Right.
And it's actually very dangerous. So we just have to be super intentional about, and the nice thing about, for me, the base camp expedition, kind of model, the capability that we have is it's very defined what slices we're taking on. It's very defined where those slices are, what exceptions we need. And then when we hit a critical mass of those, teams and capabilities in the organization, we can start to look at deprecating the larger ecosystem controls and replacing them with things that promote trust, things that promote competency, things that promote clarity across the organization. So that can be more about investment and learning and improvement versus, control. So,
well, let's see if we can get a little specific, because in this particular client that we're kind of using as our reference client for the sake of this conversation, there are others, but there's one that we clearly have in mind because it's very far down the path with us right now. So you got most everybody in the organization to about Basecamp 1, Basecamp 2, which basically means in our language that they are predictable. You can basically put in known inputs and get in known outputs. They can deliver what they say they're going to do on the time horizons that they commit. And then they've also gotten to the point where they can operate in smaller batches, which means that they can start to put software into market faster and be able to learn from it, be able to inspect and adapt, right? And so, these aren't teams; these are whole organizations that can make and meet commitments and put stuff into market fast and inspect and adapt. So, what kind of, even though that some of them hadn't moved all the way to Basecamp 3, 4, and 5, what kinds of controls, once you had predictability into the system, were you able to start to untangle?
So without getting too deep, I guess, into this customer, many of our customers have, they have financial controls, the way that they fund, the way that they plan, the way that they account for funding. Those controls they start to become the bottleneck. Now we can execute, but we've got a lot of people running around trying to account, find money, account for money. So there becomes a whole focus on funding, on money. And that focus can be also, like, we find it detrimental that when you have, a budget that's meant for new features and a budget that's meant for break, fix, and maintenance, those have different names in different companies. That incentivizes a system to where now we're going to, because we want to control that. You have X dollars for doing maintenance and X dollars for doing new product. Well, that might not be the right decision. And so you have an opportunity now. So what we look at is when we're starting, we need the exceptions to get going. We need them to for things to take hold.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can ask yourself, what can we exploit?
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're trustworthy in this new way, what can we do better, faster, than we've ever done before? And so, taking on the funding models is one of the things we can start to do. And so get away from annual cycle planning.
Yeah.
I know it's a big, scary thing for people, but
Sure.
when you have a really predictable, trustworthy system that can change, we can get into quarterly planning.
Yeah.
And we can start to measure value, and that we've earned trust with the business. There's all kinds of things we can now do that we've hit that critical mass and people trust it, and the vibe is different, right? The trust is different in the system.
Yeah. I know we're still thinking through some of this about how to talk with it, but we are starting to kind of coalesce around a language with our current clients and within Leading Agile. So Summit 1 is around, once the system is predictable, what do we start to deconstruct? The next summit, I think we're going to land on, is around making better bets, right? So at the point you can make smaller bets, right? You can reduce batch size. Then what does it mean to make better bets? So now we have whole organizations, thousands of people that can deliver on 6-week to 12-week boundaries.
Yeah.
What does that enable the organization to do at that point?
So rewinding a little bit, you said
Okay.
something I think was important. You can deconstruct, but you can also construct.
Okay.
So there are opportunities to do both, right?
Oh,
To
okay,
dismantle
cool.
the
Yeah.
thing that you were doing. So I'll give you an example of the Summit 1 opportunity, right? When we're starting the Basecamp Expedition journey, mostly we have skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
Few cynics we run into once in a while,
Mhm.
but mostly skeptics.
Yeah.
And so we have to show them the proof before they're going to believe.
Yeah.
And we ostensibly do that. We get through and they start to say, hey, I get it. This is better. I kind of get what we're doing here. And they get
Mhm.
excited about it. But when we set up, we couldn't necessarily get in and have the same kind of relationship and involvement with the business. We got enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? We operated with enough trust with the business so that they'll try it with us.
They created the space to try.
They'll create some
Yeah,
space to
sure.
try.
Yeah.
But we got to kind of show them it works, right?
Mhm.
Once we show them it works, now there's things we can go do with the business to really amplify our product management capability.
Okay.
Right? So we can deconstruct some of the low trust structure in the organization, right? The ecosystem stuff. We can also start to build on that trust and say, okay, how do we capitalize?
Mm-hmm.
What can we do better? How do we get the business in? How do we, make this a lot of times there are job architecture questions, like if I'm going to be a product manager and I'm from the business, what's my career path?
Right.
Or do I do this full time? Sometimes you get the folks who are available versus the ones that really need to be the investors for that, for those products. So there's ways to actually now say, okay, we have trust in the system. What can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's both about taking down the low trust,
sure.
but then
Okay.
building up the high trust
Okay.
at the same time. So when it comes to the making better bets piece, many of our customers, all of our customers, really, I don't think I'll just say many of our customers, when we encounter them, are very much, they're used to the project mindset.
Yeah.
So we're going to think of these projects.
So product manager comes up and says, I want to add these capabilities in. Let me get scope, time, cost, funding, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
most of these things are like snowballs, right?
Yeah.
Because when we come into a system, you get one funding window.
Mm-hmm.
And when that funding window is open, you're going to get everything you can, because you're just not going to get another tilt at that wheel. And so you get the congressional bill of things that people want to get done, right?
Yeah.
Every constituency has something in there.
Yep.
So these are, very, very large things that come into these systems. They tend to be they're composed of many smaller things
Mm-hmm.
that each is an opportunity to go get value. There's value propositions embedded. I did prior to Leading Agile, I did something at a large auto manufacturer in Detroit in 2007. And they brought in something they couldn't build turn by turn.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just too much money every time they took it to the business. So I came in and I looked at it and I decomposed it. They were trying to do like 13 different things
Mm-hmm.
from a business perspective in there.
Yeah.
And all they really, the business case was just in, consumer turn by turn capability.
Mm-hmm.
But there were 12 other value props. They were upgrading the data centers. They were like, there's all this stuff that was jammed in there. And when I showed them that decomposition, they said, well, why don't we just do that? And they built it. right?
So are you saying, and so I'm going to take a chance here, but basically the make better bets is really exploiting the organization's ability to do things in smaller batches, exploiting this newfound trust with the business to be able to say, okay, we're gonna operate in different funding models and shorter cycles and things like that. So it really becomes almost like we make better bets by putting smaller things in the system and learning faster. Is that kind of where
It's
you're
a big
headed?
part of it. It's a big
Okay.
part of it. You've got so you could think about it as once we've got some trust, and the business trusts and IT trusts, frankly, that we're not trying to just take stuff away from them when we're doing work. You can get into a couple different conversations. One is so like there's a lot of push around OKRs. How are the things that you're asking for aligned in whole to our strategy? Are they pushing our strategy forward, or are they something tangential to that? So you can make a decision with the business in whole about an entire initiative. Does this thing map or doesn't it? Where does it fall? And you can have a cut line that things can fall below then with the business.
So this is where kind of the OKR, KPIs, strategy articulation, strategy delegation starts to come in.
So once you have that cut line of the things that aren't really pushing your strategy forward, don't have the required rate of return, right? They're just not the things that you're going to focus your capacity on. You have a set of things left over. And those things that are left over tend to still be what we see, very large, composed monoliths of many value propositions. So take that list of things and say, how do we decompose this by value prop? Like, who are we trying to take care of? What are we trying to help them do? What do we get when we do that? Like, what are the options to do it? What do we get? And you can start to decompose those large congressional riders. But if you haven't attacked the funding problem and they think they're only going to get one tilt at the wheel, they're not going to go there with you.
Right.
So that's why you have to look at, okay, how do I get trust around the funding so that we can always revisit and learn and come back and sweep up new opportunity. So it's really a multi-step process of getting to more rapid, more value dense, more high quality and more impactful, strategic.
Well, the hypothesis around the base camp story, and it was really interesting because this was like really in the early stages of Leading Agile, where we were really trying to figure out how to, as a consultancy, build trust with our clients, right? So we would come in and really quickly stabilize the delivery system, get it predictable. And then we'd start working on batch size. But what we knew at the end of the day is we had to start figuring out how to break dependencies. And then we had to start figuring out how to fund complete teams. And we had to then let them start to inspect and adapt. And so there was an implied precedence there, because you couldn't take these big tangled up organizations and just flip the switch overnight. You had to start to layer in capability. And as you built trust and you built capability, you could ask for permission to do more, right? We could start to ask the organization to change even further. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's a precedence to this, the things that you can do at Summit One once the organization is predictable. And then once you've got it to where like you've changed some of the budgeting and funding and things like that, now we can take it to the next step. Does that make sense where I'm headed with that?
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you look at they're almost ecosystem dependencies you could think about, right? That are killing speed and agility. So if I only trust that I'm going to get one shot at funding, that's the only shot I'm going to get as a business person, I'm going to jam that thing up with everything I think I ever need. So in order for us to get to better bets, smaller batches, there's a piece of funding we have to go take care of. So
it's fascinating, right? So the point that I keep wanting to drive home and I keep pulling it to, there's a sequence to this that has to be in place, because you just can't say we're going to, ask the business not to show up with their big giant, pork barrel loaded projects because they don't trust the system to be able to come back and get another tranche in 3 months once they've delivered the value from the first one. So we can't have that conversation until the funding and the planning cycles are done, but we can't have the funding and planning cycles conversations until the system is trustworthy and predictable, right? So that I think it's fascinating because the precedence, the order of events, almost becomes like it's a necessary part of the story, the sequencing of it.
And that's that's what emerged on the whiteboard during our energized sessions in
We have a lot of
Snowbird.
energized sessions.
We do a
when we
lot
get
of
together.
energized sessions in this company.
Yeah.
But that there is definitely precedence to what you have to do. So, trying to do everything at once, not only is it overwhelming, it's also like there's generally some laws of physics that we have to like pay attention to here.
Yeah.
That certain things have to be done before other things can be done and other conditions can be put in place.
You want a little fun fact is where the whole expedition to base camp metaphor and where all that came from and why I think it's relevant here?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. Just go with me on this one, right? Yeah. Go with me on this one. So back, I still get out and do a lot of hiking. I don't really do like mountain climbing or anything like that per se, but I do get out and do a lot of hiking. And I don't know if you've ever experienced where you're walking up a big giant hill and it looks like you're walking to the top of it. But when you get to the top of that next hill, there's like another big giant hill behind that, right? So I call them false peaks. And so a little bit, it's like you have to get the organization moving. But if they saw the entirety of the mountain, they might go, I don't know, right? So it's kind of like you talk about the entirety of the mountain, but like, let's just get to the top of this one. And then we can rest for a minute. And then we'll get to the top of the next one. And then we'll rest for a little bit. And that was the whole idea behind the expedition to base camp metaphor, because we have this group of people that are going on this journey. And when they get to a base camp, they can kind of go, they can reorient, let the system kind of stabilize, and then go to the next base camp. But that was the reason why we used the mountain metaphor and the base camp metaphor initially, is because you got to get to the first peak before you get to the second peak, before you get to the third. But the point being is that sometimes you can't even see the second and third peak until you get predictable. So the idea was let's get people predictable, and then they can see how to start reducing batch size. Let's get them to reduce batch size. Then they can start to see how to begin to start to break dependencies, once we got that far. And I think that's what's emerging at the summit level as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that
thanks for humoring me there.
Yeah, sure. No, it's good. I certainly did. No. So one of the things that, so it resonates, right?
Yeah.
The reason it resonates is, there's to get an organization to truly align itself to its customers and markets, right? Its capabilities and its systems. And it's a big journey.
Huge.
And so, and one of the things that I really enjoyed and still enjoy about Leading Agile is one of the biggest lessons I've learned is this notion of safety. Like safety is a first-class object.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so it's as tangible as the air we breathe. Right. And so within that, I had talked about that conversation I had with the CIO. I never want to be the constraint when we're doing transformation. Like I don't want to say, okay, this CIO only wants to move this fast.
Right.
And so I want to know how fast they want to move. And so I talked to this individual and said, here's the 27 systems you're going to have to go change for, to get to where you're going. And just that response was, Chris, 12 months, man, 10 to 12 months. Tell me what's not going to kill me. Right. And so I knew what his rangefinder was, how far out he wanted to see. But if I exposed, and this is true with many of our customers, if I expose the whole journey, if I would have told them day one, we need to come in and we need to change how you're doing funding, that would have felt impossible for this organization.
Yeah.
And they would have shut down. But once they got to predictable, and there was trust and excitement and a lot of pride, frankly, well-earned pride on their part for what they'd accomplished, didn't seem quite so bad. Yeah. Right. It seemed doable.
Felt like they could do it. They built some muscle memory.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if
I'm not understanding, you could actually tell them about the whole journey, right? But what this executive needed was, what can we do in the next 8 to 12 months, right?
There are executives you can tell the whole journey to.
Okay.
And then there are customers that if you tell them that journey, it will just be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't want to overwhelm them. So you have to gauge, what they're able to handle.
So sometimes it needs to be a little bit of a pull system instead of a push system.
I mean, and it's different people can handle different levels of seeing the future and everything that has to get done. And so some people are energized by it and some people just overwhelmed.
So I want to unpack this idea that you brought up around creating safety for change. But before we go there, right? So we talked a little bit about the idea, the Summit 1, establish trust, Summit 2, make better bets. Why did you sequence, or why did we sequence the, basically the aligned to value streams, drive continuous feedback, sense and disrupt, right? So talk to me just at a high level about where it goes after the make better bets.
So what the OKR systems and the so going and defining those OKRs and mapping them to the the product teams that we have in the delivery, the system of delivery, what we're seeing is kind of what we thought we would see, right? Which is the value propositions that the organization is working on, they're cross-cutting.
Right.
So there's the way the organization and most of our client organizations have themselves set up. It's usually some domain oriented, or there's some way that they've organized themselves functionally or by domain.
Right.
And when you look at, if you were to coat the customer's feet with ink, right, they would walk right across that organization, and they'd step through a bunch of different parts of that organization that don't all report up to any specific leader.
Mental models that never go away. If I coated my customers' feet with ink, their footprints would be all over everything.
Well, they cut across how the organization is set up right now. Well, there's not even a system of prioritization for that. Like there's no place at the very top that says all things have to be prioritized through this so we can actually do these types of things. So there's a lot of tin cupping, and there's a lot of teamwork that has to happen outside of the system of delivery, a lot of agreement brokering and political things that have to happen in order to even get those things done. And so you have the priority units, and they're kind of in their stovepipes, and then you have the things that are trying to get done that cross those stovepipes. And so when we look at that and we start to say, okay, well, where do we want this organization? Where is it going to want to go strategically? What's it going to want to be able to do? Who's it going to want to be able to do that for? We have to look at, okay, maybe this alignment isn't what we, isn't the way we want to stay aligned, right? So we have to look at we want to reduce the surface area that all those footprints need to walk across. We do. We want to effectively push it down in the organization. Right. So pay attention to how high in the organization you're orchestrating and how much. And you want to basically encapsulate that, push that down to where the fewest number of teams
Well, that was one of the things that I always thought was interesting about SAFE, right? Is that SAFE talks about aligning around value streams, but most of the clients we walked into, there's just no way you could untangle the value streams early on because they all intersect, right? They're all basically working upon shared capabilities. So one of the things that you said early on that I thought was really powerful is that when you make all of the orchestration costs across the business capabilities really explicit, you can see what dependencies and what coordination is actually driving the expense, what's creating the latency. And then you can reorganize business capabilities to push that decision-making down. But in effect, what you're doing there is you're aligning around value streams. So it almost becomes a very mechanized approach, organize around business capabilities, expose orchestration costs, figure out where orchestration costs are high, reorganize to reduce orchestration costs. That's aligning around value streams.
Yeah, but there's a couple of dimensions you have to pay attention to. So if you have a set of value propositions, a set of customers and markets that you really want to, you're gonna put some strategic emphasis on that, and it really is looking at your markets. There are the products that you want to change to satisfy those value propositions, and then there's the products you have to change because they're somehow stuck to the ones you want to change. So what we see is a lot of technical dependencies, a lot of other dependencies too, but a lot of technical dependencies, specifically large applications. So, things that are 20, 30 years old, have lived and done their jobs. But when you look at them, taking pieces out is not an easy thing to do. They could be ERP systems, they could be legacy custom apps, they could be a lot of different things. But if we were to try to extract them, they have to be changed, built, tested, and released together. And so the way organizations we find them tend to be organized is to make that orchestration low.
Right.
Well, when the value propositions start to cross-cut that structure, then we have a lot of orchestration to do because those big monoliths have to be released together. They have to be changed and released together. So as we start to look ahead, we have to figure out. So we're looking at this process of product extraction, which is how do we identify the products that we need to deliver to those strategic value propositions? How do we pull them out of their monolithic structures Still, so make sure they're integrated in and everything still works, but to be able to have those things basically release at a faster rate, to be more responsive, to move to higher base camp.
So here's what's interesting, right? So base camp theory is break dependency. So again, what's in my head back in the day was you have 10 or 12 teams, right? They're probably operating on some sort of monolith. We start to break them, encapsulate them, put APIs around them, whatever. So this is like that at like one level up, like around value streams across the enterprise?
Yeah, so we need to, in effect, if you look at what Basecamp 3 is trying to do, is it's basically saying that these product teams need to be able to deliver independently of each other, but still have quality, still have like everything still has to be there. Once we've done that, what can we do to exploit that? Going back to kind of the earlier point, well, we can start to take the specific products and organize them around specific value propositions, and really decrease the amount of orchestration in the system. So if you think about it, there's the set of products that need to change in order to fulfill a value proposition. And then there's a set of products that have to change because they're stuck to those products.
Right.
We can start to cut those dependencies and say, okay, first of all, don't need to change all those other things anymore because they're not stuck to the products that we're really interested in changing. And then how can we organize those products?
Yeah.
Are there platforms and are there experiential kind of value proposition specific products and structures that we want to form in a way that really streamlines that delivery, that value stream?
So talk to me really briefly, and then I'm going to move on to some of the safety stuff, and I think we'll put a bow on this thing because it's going to be almost an hour here. So drive continuous feedback and sense and disrupt. Where's your head on that? Because these are the least defined, right? Because we're progressively elaborating our understanding of this. So tell me what your current understanding is, knowing I won't hold you to it in 3 to 6 months, because we're going to learn more.
All right. So this is documented. So I'm
getting them on tape, right? So I can at least have a reference point.
So you all heard this. I do believe that, I'm watching what's happening in our customers where we're making these changes, Mike, and we've got predictable delivery, like, things are working in, we're making better bets. There are still, so we're still kind of working through this whole notion of, of product extraction and things like that. So calling the ball, I do think that we're going to find that even the OKR system and the quarterly planning cycles that we're taking our customers into, strategic quarterly planning, strategic cycles are going to be too long for some of those customers, and that will be the bottleneck. Yeah. And so we're going to have to take some set of capabilities of products and teams to where they're just in direct delivery and feedback cycles with their customers.
Which is really the promise of business agility, at that strategic level, being that tightly coupled to your client.
Yeah, I think so. But I think what'll be interesting to me is how batch size reveals itself at that point, because having, and this is kind of where I grew up in this whole Agile thing, right? Yeah. In my pillar days, having these teams delivering directly to customers, changing what you're doing every 2 days based on feedback, right? Yeah. So we're getting feedback and we're changing and we're getting feedback. Those problems it would be hard to do that at scale. Yeah. Right. So I think as we move up this curve, we're going to find that, we're probably dealing with problems that aren't quite as scaled. Yeah. In the problem set. And so individual teams, again, can kind of take those on, or small product lines, small sets of teams can take those things on. Yeah. Really in a direct, just give them the money, have them work with the business and just keep delivering. Yeah. Keep learning.
Well, that was always the thing. Like on some levels, I almost feel like myself as somebody who has, been talking about this for 10, 12 years. Like on one level, I always felt like I took a contrarian point of view to the rest of our industry. But I really don't think I did, right? I think the early Agilists, I think what you were doing at Pillar and prior, I think was right. And I never argued with whether it was right. My question is that like, how do you get there? And I think that's really what we're start to unpacking. It's like, the guys that, that signed the manifesto 20 years ago, they were right. Maybe just not pragmatic enough for me about how you begin to start to untangle and actually help some of these legacy customers.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting definition of there. Yeah. Right? Which is there isn't just Basecamp 4 or something 4. There is an organization that's aligned to its customers and markets, and
Yeah.
where it needs to be predictable and, kind of summit one, base camp one kind of, organizational design, that's where it is. And then where it needs to work in smaller batches, that's where it is. There is when you have an organization that not everything has to go all that way. So it's that true aligned state. And I look at in the last part of your question was, really the invest to learn piece. Right?
Mhm.
So a lot of people think about lean startup type
Mhm.
capability.
Yeah, for sure.
What I notice with customers is as we look at their value propositions, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I've been dealing with this most of my career. I think I'm sure most people do. There's usually a high sense of pride in one person's best guess of
Mhm.
what we should do. And if I look at the actual level of certainty in the value propositions, many of the things that organizations make big bets on have super high uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so they try to scale before they even know what to do.
Right.
And the reason is because somebody thinks they know the market, or somebody's an expert in something,
Yeah.
or the business wants something very large. But if you actually peel it back, the best thing to do is spend $10,000 or $20,000 to figure out whether that's even a good idea.
Right.
Even in a large organization, having that capability kind of at the front end of your value streams is a little bit of a multiplexer,
Mhm.
right? To say, okay, do we scale this one? Do we know enough about market or implementation to where we route this into our scaled organization
Yeah.
and invest $2 million or $5 million in it? Or do we just take this one and say, wait a minute, could be a good idea, might not. Can we prove or disprove, get more information about this? Can we lower our uncertainty? So invest in lowering that uncertainty to say, okay, now we know this is the market, this is the value proposition, here's the...
But here's the interesting thing. We've always understood that that's how we needed to operate. What we're really talking about is how do we create the conditions so that the organization can actually operate that way?
It's also structure.
Yeah.
So there's structure and governance to it.
Yeah.
What do we, where does it live?
Maybe some metrics too.
Well, it could be in some metrics there.
Structure, governance.
So it's crazy talk, Mike.
It's crazy
Just
talk.
Crazy
Man.
talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I think even in organizations that are very venerable, large organizations, how it's very tricky, right? How do I get an organization that can help me vet uncertainty, right?
Mhm.
Reduce uncertainty, reduce risk. And how do I relate that to my scaled structure?
Yeah.
So that, because what happens is a lot of organizations, they'll set up these little kind of labs things or
Mhm.
lean startup-y things, and they'll go off and do stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes that stuff that, that they're thinking of or testing on their own, there's no one to own it.
Yeah.
Right. When they want to transition it. So I look at the bets that are coming through all of our customers' portfolios, and it's clear to me like some of those are way more uncertain than others.
Yeah.
And even those bets would be good to test them.
Yeah.
Like say, let's not approve $10 million for this because we don't know enough about it. Sounds like a good idea. Can we just do 50,000?
Yeah.
Right. And figure out whether or not this is worth spending the other, 900 plus or 9 million plus. So there's a structural hypothesis to that. Like, how does it relate? There's a governance hypothesis. Yeah, there's a metrics hypothesis too. How do you fit that whole organization together that has some base camp 1, base camp 2, base camp 3, base camp 4, base camp 5, all of those things working in concert based on the nature of the problem, based on the nature of the, of the solution, based on the nature of the organization. That is the there, I think, is all of that calibrated. And then maybe just the little piece after that is the ability of that organization to stay calibrated.
Yeah.
Because the world isn't going to hang on a string for them, right? Some things that used to be differentiating will change, and some things that used to be commodity will become differentiating.
Mm-hmm.
And an organization not only needs to get aligned to its customers and markets, it needs to stay aligned.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so that's probably a great stopping place, but I'm going to just push one more little topic further, and I want to explore something with you. It's kind of ironic because you're talking about the idea of, basically be able to make smaller bets, try things, learn from your markets, inspect and adapt, sense and disrupt, right? All the kinds of things we talk about. A little bit of the base camp to expedition model for us was a lot of that. It's like if you're going to go down this path of organizational change, don't try to boil the entire ocean. Prove a thread, prove a thread, prove a thread. So a big part of expeditions to base camps or organizations to summits is about the ability to run small experiments, prove that it works, scale it up, and then as you scale it up, start to make the bigger organizational change. So we're not making these gigantic bets along the way. But I want to anchor that on safety. We have a couple of structures, right? The idea of base camps, summits. We talk a lot internally about the idea of outcomes-based plans. Peaster might even be involved in that. Talk a little bit about how the Leading Agile Change Model creates safety and ground cover for change to do these things. Because we've talked about some really, really big changes in the organization that take a long time. How have you maintained safety and created and kept the energy high to be able to do this?
Yeah, so I used to do a talk. I used to work for a company called Cengage Learning, and I ran product development there for a while, and I would do a talk at conferences, and I had a slide. On the slide was an iron teddy bear.
Okay.
Thing weighs like 70 pounds, right?
Okay.
90 pound.
Did you actually have a real one, or was
it was a slide?
Oh, it was a slide.
It was a picture of a cast iron teddy bear.
You just knew how much it weighed, so I wasn't
and
sure.
And so did my research.
Okay.
So the metaphor I was giving people is that, when we do this work, we're taking away their iron teddy bear.
Okay.
It's very, very comforting, but it's heavy and bulky and hard to wield and walk around with, right?
Okay.
So they've got this heavyweight teddy bear, and we're saying we got a better one.
Okay.
Right? And in that, so we're taking away the metaphor a little bit, right? We're basically saying everything you've done, everything you've learned, right? Right now, I need you to trust me.
Yeah. Suspend disbelief a little bit.
So suspend disbelief. Yeah. Trust me. You will get to a place where you feel that competence, that confidence, that all of that, clarity again, but you're going to be dissonant for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And in that dissonance, just showing up, this is where I struggle with that pillar story. Like, we just need to coach executives. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, and what, right?
Yeah.
So what is everybody going to go do?
Yeah.
So people have to first trust that they're going to be safe with you, right? That you've got a system, you've got a way to get them where they need to go, right? To take care of their careers, because everybody's got to feed their families and send their kids to college and all that stuff. So just having empathy with that, all of the things that we have that are dovetailed together, and I believe there's truth in them, right? I believe that these are some laws of physics embedded in what we're doing. They provide the path of that. Okay, I can't tell you what day you're going to feel safe again, but I can tell you what the process is going to be to get to safety and how it all works.
Yeah.
And so
I've always thought of that as like leading indicators and lagging indicators. Like, what are we doing to build trust and create safety as we go, knowing that the ultimate outcome in organizational performance is what's really going to create safety?
Yeah. So not everything can be a moving part.
Yeah.
Right, when you're trying to feel safe. And so knowing that there's this structure with these people who know how to run this system, and there's an outcomes-based plan, and I go through these outcomes and I get these coaches, and this is how we're working together. This is how we assess our progress. Having that much discipline to it and having that much repeatability to it creates safety for people. Just having coaches show up and coach stuff, it's a black box. I don't know, what are you going to coach me today? What am I going to learn tomorrow? When are we going to be where we need to go? Right. So everything we have, from the executive down to the work surface, to me, provides clarity to people. This is what we have to do. Right. That clarity at least takes mystery out of that situation. And creates, it doesn't create absolute safety, because they still have to go through the journey. But it does take, I use the Space Mountain metaphor from my pillar days.
Okay.
Right? So we would take customers on Space Mountain rides. We'd bring in these XP teams and people who would train. There was no process to it. We would just figure out what you needed, and we'd start to coach it. To our customers, that felt like Space Mountain. It's really dark. We're going fast.
Yeah.
I'm whipping around. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be okay at the end.
You're hoping you're having fun.
But, at the end, I'm like, okay. Yeah. So maybe in a Disney sense, that's a good experience.
Yeah.
But when you're bringing people through change and it's affecting their career and their livelihood, I can tell you they don't like it.
Terrifying.
Right? It is terrifying. And so we don't, I think so. Having the lights on the way we do and the system that we have I think it keeps that very transparent for people.
I like that expression. It's like the system of transformation is like keeping the lights on for people.
It does. It creates.
See where we're going.
They can see where they're going. They're not whipping around, and it doesn't feel like I don't know what's happening to me and whether I'm going to be safe at the end of this.
Right. Very cool. Well, thanks for coming down. This was a great conversation. Appreciate
always
it.
Always fun to be down here.
We'll do it again soon sometime.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. See ya.